Should we get started? We have 47 folks here with us right now, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's great. I think we'll get started so we can hopefully stick to the 1 hour time for everybody. And I'm sure some folks will join in late, and that's totally cool. So hello, thanks for joining us today. A bit about who we are. So I'm Katie German. My role at FoodShare is I'm the director of programs. So most of the stuff that we're doing sort of in community spaces and in schools is stuff that I work on. And my background is in education and community organizing. And Brooke, do you want to say hi?
Hi, my name's Brooke Siebel, and I'm the manager of the community food programs here at FoodShare. So my role involves doing food literacy and food justice education work with babies and toddlers and their caregivers, as well as children and youth in the school setting, teachers and educators, and also adults via the Community Kitchens program as well. And so I've been doing this kind of work for 12 years, but I also have a background in nutrition and dietetics.
Thanks. So a reminder that we're recording today's session. And then our hope is that our intention is to post this session on our website. So then it's available for everyone to watch, and it'll be shared with when new staff join FoodShare and things like that. But you will be able to find it after the fact if you want to share it with anyone. So some little sort of Zoom etiquette reminders for today. Please feel free to rename yourself. If you want to add your pronouns or your organization's name, you can do that on the right-hand side over in participants. If you could keep yourself muted, that would be helpful just to make sure the sound is nice and clean. Cameras are totally not necessary. If you want to turn yours on, you're more than welcome to, but there's no expectation that you do. Our colleague Kala is here on the call, and she's renamed herself with the Zoom tech. So if you have any issues with sound or just like seeing the slides, or if you want to connect with somebody about the Zoom platform in particular, you can reach out to Kala. And if you have comments and questions and stuff, you can just pop them into the chat box, and Kala is going to keep an eye on the chat box there so that we can hopefully get to questions at the end of the session. So we'll start with the land acknowledgement. FoodShare acknowledges that the sacred land in which we operate is situated upon the traditional territories of the Wendat, Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. This territory is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee allied nations to peaceably share and care for the lands around the Great Lakes. FoodShare recognizes the many nations of Indigenous people who presently live on this land, those who have spent time here, and the ancestors who have hunted and gathered on this land known as Turtle Island. And a way to sort of contextualize our land acknowledgement today, one, I wanted to share direct action that folks might be interested in. So one that's relevant to us here in Ontario is the 1492 Land Back Lane Legal Defense Fund. That's something that I've contributed to as a settler and would be something that would be great for folks to take a look at if you're in the area. And then also to make a connection to what we're talking about today, we wanted to share the work of Ashley Gillen, who is a Maori woman who does work on Indigenous sovereignty and fat bodies and gender. And so I've linked to an article that will hopefully drop in the chat. Oh yeah, Cal's already on it. So if you want to access any of those links to sort of really contextualize Indigenous perspectives with the conversation around body positivity, we wanted to make that available to you. So the link is there. It's a great read. So thanks. So just to kind of frame the session, one thing we wanted to acknowledge is that throughout we will use the words fat and thin quite often. And we do this with no associated value statement or moral statement or judgment. We're using those as a description of body size. And I will say, as a fat person who's been fat all my life, I'll talk about being a fat person, and it's not pejorative or a put down or anything like that. It's just the language that we'll be using in the session. But we recognize that that might stand out to some folks. So just wanted to call attention to that. In terms of a very brief community agreement that we hope folks are able to stick to, with any conversation that touches on things like stigma or shame, if you want to tune out or take a break or step away, totally feel free to do so. ideas around impact versus intent. So we are definitely open to stuff going into the chat box and conversations happening. We welcome those comments. However, we ask that people recognize that even if your comment wasn't intended to be hurtful, it's important to take responsibility for the impact and how it lands. And that we ask people to use I statements. It's something that Brooke and myself will be doing as we talk about the work we've been doing at FoodShare over the past couple of years. And we ask that people also speak from their own perspective on this issue. So our goal today is to share with you some of the work that we've been doing over, I would say maybe the last 3 years in a focused way, 2 or 3 years. It's going to include debunking some myths and sharing some facts, sharing kind of our like light bulb moment where we were like, we really want to start working on this. The work that we did internally and the types of people that we spoke to around getting expert advice, trying to figure out what it is exactly that we're doing and what we want to call it, writing it all down. So sharing our statement and some of the frameworks that we've developed with you in hopes that you might be able to adapt them and use them in your own organization. Our process of doing sort of more public facing work around this, and then what we're doing sort of to take action and actually stick to our plan. So it's a bit of mapping out what we've done. And that's kind of also maps out how the session is laid out as well. So we'll be sharing all of that with you today. And if you're new to FoodShare, we thought we would at least just give you some context. So we are in Toronto. We work to advance the right to food for all people. And our vision is that we one day live in a Toronto where all people can feed themselves, their loved ones, and their communities with dignity and joy. And how we do that is to advocate for food justice by supporting community-based food initiatives through ongoing advocacy and public education. And so we try and focus our resources and our programming and our partnerships and relationship building with communities that are most affected by food insecurity. And we try to focus on long-term systemic solutions that are building at and addressing sort of the systemic forms of marginalization and oppression that exist within the food system and the food movement as well. That's a very brief us in a nutshell, but I'll pass it over to Brooke to do sort of our setting the stage myths and facts activity.
Thanks, Katie. Okay, so let's bust some myths. It's one of my favorite things to do on a Wednesday morning. So you don't need to do anything for this next part. You can think about whether you feel like it's true, false, or somewhere in between in your own brains. You don't need to engage in the chat for this part. But let's spend some time now going over some well-known and some less well-known myths associated with bodies and weight. So body mass index, commonly known as BMI, where you measure your height by your weight, is the best predictor of one's physical health. True, false, or somewhere in between? False. So the difference between actual and desired body weight, so that's the weight that you in your mind want to be, is a stronger predictor of both mental and physical health than BMI. So the broader that gap between what you actually weigh and where you want to be, the worse off your health outcomes are. So some of the health effects attributed to obesity are related to the way that we actually view our own bodies. And so for the sources for these true and false questions, Cal is going to be dropping those into the chat for you, so with a direct link to the studies. Number 2. A normal BMI, that's that body mass index again, will always be the best predictor of life expectancy. True, false, or somewhere in between? False. So this is a pretty recent study. 2016, this was published, and it included over 100,000 Danish citizens, and it took place over 37 years. In 3 different cohorts, and it showed that the BMI associated with the lowest all-cause mortality shifted over that time from normal to overweight. So at the beginning of the study, their lowest all-cause mortality was a BMI 23.7. By the end, at the end of those 37 years, it was actually 27, which is in the overweight category. So one thing we should note about this study, though, is that all the participants were actually white. So that is a bit of a confounder there. Another study showed that for people 55 and over, overweight and obesity both confer with a significant decrease in risk of mortality. So there you go. Okay, so teens who believe they are overweight are at a greater risk for depression and mental health concerns than those who do not. True, false, or somewhere in between? So this is true. So high school students who classify themselves as overweight, whether it's perceived or real, are at a greater risk for depression and suicide attempts. Evidence shows that people who are fat make less money than their colleagues who are thin. This one's true. So a study of over 11,000 German workers and 12,000 American workers found that thin women made more than fat women for the same position, and men of a moderate weight made more than thin men or fat men for that same position. The strongest associated risk factor for type 2 diabetes is diet. False. So there's increasing evidence to suggest that the strongest associated risk factor for type 2 diabetes is poverty. HR studies show that fat people are less likely to be recommended for management positions and face-to-face customer positions than thinner people. This one's true. Hiring studies that used either physical descriptions, photos, or manipulated video footage of job candidates found that fat people were selected less often for jobs in general and less often for management positions and were streamed into back office work. People who are classified as obese receive the same medical care as people who are classified as a normal body weight. This one's false. So there was a survey of nurses that found that nearly half of them said they were uncomfortable caring for an obese person, and that 31% said that they would prefer not to care for an obese person. That same study found that BMI is significantly related to medical appointment cancellations, and that people are delaying care to avoid the fat stigma that comes along with it. This is you, Katie.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So that kind of sets the stage for like kind of what our assumptions are around body size and fat bodies and obesity and what the realities are. And we wanted to share sort of our light bulb moment where we were like, oh, I think we really need to take a different path in our work when it comes to obesity and body size when we talk about food work. So at FoodShare, we talk about race, we talk about income and poverty, we talk about access, but it hasn't been until fairly recently that we've started talking about discrimination around body size. And we would say that not only were we not really talking about it, some of the work that we were doing, not with the intention of harming folks who are in fat bodies, but regardless of intention, the impact was we were accepting money from funders who work to address obesity. We were attending meetings that were equating body size with health and using those terms interchangeably. And we were upholding standards that really weren't helping anybody. So for us, that kind of light bulb moment was I went to a community event called it was the launch of the Healthy Kids Community Challenge. So this was a provincial initiative. It was happening across the province and communities across the province. And it had different themes. And one of the themes was called Choose to Boost Veggies and Fruits. And so I went to this community launch. There was about 60 different community organizations there. And the facilitator put a question up on the board that said, how do we work together to address the obesity epidemic in our city? And I thought, oh, that's the question. That's what this whole thing is about. And realized that the Healthy Kids Community Challenge is based on a French from France model called the EPOD, which translates to Together, Let's Prevent Childhood Obesity. And I found myself sitting in a room full of people who were brainstorming ways to make my body disappear, brainstorming ways to ensure that children and youth in the city don't grow up to have a body that looks like mine. And that was like, if this is what I'm doing with my work, I am not doing good work. And so if you want to go to the next slide, the sort of the key thing is that as someone whose body has always measured as obese as a child and as an adult and now, I can say that for myself, the long-term health impacts that I have from being fat are only related to my mental health. And so we need to ask some critical questions about what long-term harm are we causing to people's mental health when we design programs that center around critiquing their body size. So this, for us, was like, we have some work to do. So we got started on these next questions and next steps. So one of the very first things we did was bring in an external expert. And the folks that we chose are from a group called It Gets Fatter. They are a BIPOC queer collective of fat folks. So we were intentional about using that intersectional lens. And they provided an internal training to FoodShare staff. We decided to make that mandatory for anyone who works in programs, anyone who works in communications and fundraising, and anyone who works in development. And then also it was available to any other staff who wanted to come. And what we hoped with this sort of initial workshop is that it would focus on surfacing issues that are specific to FoodShare. So what's the work that FoodShare is doing? What critical questions do we need to ask about ourselves? And that we would use that as a starting point for our committee work. And we also had the facilitator, Awesome, who's from It Gets Fatter, do a training with our board, which, as you can imagine, or possibly can imagine, there was a lot of pushback and interesting conversations there too. We wanted to plug Awesome. If this is the type of work that you are interested in working with, you should reach out to Awesome. He's a really incredible facilitator, highly skilled, empathetic, thoughtful, extremely knowledgeable in this field. If you are looking for support in doing this work, please go to Awesome's website and work with Awesome. He's great.
Thanks, Katie. So with all that in mind, it was time for FoodShare to take a long, hard look in the mirror. But I will also take this moment to say that it was also time for me, with a history of nutrition and dietetics, to take a long, hard look in the mirror. So a lot of those myth busters that we just went through were news to me, and I had a lot of relearning to do. And lucky for me, that I had a lot of great folks to talk with issues at FoodShare about, and also how we engaged with external experts as well. So I just wanted to point out that this was like a pretty steep learning curve for me personally. And so it's a journey that I've been on since we got together with the task force in 2018. We'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so we took a long, hard look in the mirror as an organization, and we needed to make some decisions. So what stance does FoodShare want to take when it comes to obesity and fat shaming in food movement work? How do we develop a position? And then how do we communicate that position? What do we need to change about ourselves, our programs, our fundraising, our HR processes? So these are some of the bigger questions we were asking ourselves. So then enter the body positivity task force. So just FYI on the side, a task force for us is the name that we give to committees that have a limited time role. So it means that we have work to do, but we don't plan to keep it around forever. But I will mention that we were created in 2018 and we are still together because there is still work to do, and we keep reworking as well. So created in 2018 to address our involvement in upholding fat-phobic standards that not only discriminate against those who identify as fat, but also as it intersects with race, class, disability, gender, sexuality, and other identity markers. So we had some work to do. So the terms of reference were already developed when the group was brought together. So that was done by our executive director, Paul Taylor, as well as Katie. So that already existed, and you can see that. If you're interested in seeing what those are, we'll drop the link into the chat. So the task force members were invited to join at that point. So we wanted to make sure there was at least 2 folks from management and 2 from non-management, as well as programs director, which is Katie, as the chair of the task force. So back in those days, we attended monthly in-person meetings. Those were the days, to really get our ideas and our thoughts together. We met quite regularly. And the idea was that, yeah, we would be disbanded once all the objectives had been achieved, but we're still together and we're still doing the work, and it's in progress. So then it was time to revisit these bigger questions. So now we've got our team together, we're a bit more focused, and we can start honing in on these different broader questions. So let's look at the first one about our stance. So we decided FoodShare wouldn't stand for it. Not only would we not stand for it, but we'll call it out when we see it. And we'll help fuel the conversation publicly and provide training for others when necessary. So how do we develop a position? So our idea was to work collaboratively as an internal task force to draft up a body positivity statement. We also were seeking external expert feedback from folks who self-identify as Black, Indigenous, people of colour who are fat. We also had youth who were reviewing our materials and a student who was doing a literature review. So with those edits, we have then, of course, make edits. We seek FoodShare staff feedback at that point, make edits again, and then we bring it forward to the board for approval. So how do we then communicate that position? So we start talking about it. We incorporate it into our work and our workplace as well. We post about it on our website, we share via social media, and we offer trainings internally and externally, like this one. So what do we need to change? So we need to develop new program content, so actual curriculum, and adapt the old as needed. We need to be careful about the partners that we work alongside, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. And we need it to be integrated into all of our HR processes. So for example, our onboarding processes.
So that was the work of the committee kind of mapped out at like, these are the big buckets of steps that FoodShare needs to take as an organization. One of the key fundamental questions is that we're still wrestling with is body positivity the best descriptor of our work and the work that we're doing? So we wanted to stop and just talk a little bit about language. Body positivity, if you Google it, you'll get 100 definitions. In general, it's an idea of an acceptance. Sometimes the body positivity term also has this idea of like a celebration of your body as it is. It has roots in fat activism and fat acceptance, which is essentially saying that fat people deserve equal rights as everybody else. However, lots of critique these days around the term body positivity being co-opted by corporate interests, being used like fed into capitalism as a way to make money, and sort of the influencer culture, and quite valid critique that body positivity has in many ways become an additional way for people to feel bad about their bodies. If they don't celebrate their body as it is, they're doing body positivity wrong. So in some cases, it's like added another layer of sort of tension and critique of people's bodies, which I would hope was not the intent. So on the next one here, you'll see there's like a whole host of possible terms that we could be talking about. One, body liberation is the idea is that you want to actually be free from all these social political systems of oppression that designate certain bodies as more worthy than others. Body sovereignty, the concept that the person has the right to full control of their own body. Body acceptance is just the idea of accepting where you're at and not having this, you don't need to be completely satisfied and overjoyed at the state of the size of your body. Body neutrality, we considered the idea that like you just don't have to feel any type of way about your body. We're not prescriptive, it's not joyful, it's not anything, it's just like you have a body. Fat shaming is the idea of like humiliating someone based on the size of their body. Weight stigma refers to the social stereotypes and misconceptions. There's health at every size, which is more of like a health-based framework often used in medical spaces, talking about size acceptance to end weight discrimination. So I would say that throughout, from the start of our task force to now, we still don't agree on what we exactly want to call it. And we wanted to share that with you because part of the work is that it's ongoing and we're constantly trying to think about whether we're getting it right and changing it. So we decided to call the task force the Body Positivity Task Force and to call our statement a body positivity statement. One, because we couldn't agree on a better term and we talked about it a lot. And two, we decided that it was, in this last little bit on the slide there, talks about Dr. Jill Andrews, who is a provincial MPP here in Ontario, but also started Body Confidence Canada, talks about getting your foot in the door. And we felt that body positivity was, people were receptive to like, oh, FoodShare is doing body positivity work. That's interesting. I'm interested in body positivity work. That sounds great. And then once they're there, they can see, we're going to share our statement with you that the task force created is much more about intersectionality, liberation, oppression, those types of things. So we fully acknowledge that body positivity is possibly not the right word. And one of the things that we're doing now that we've been doing this work for 2 or 3 years is we're consulting with some more people to say, hey, you've seen what we've been doing. You see where we want to go. Is this the right term? So we're about to share with you our statement of body positivity with the full sort of like context that it's likely to change quite soon. And that what we might do is move away from or further clarify what we mean by body positivity. But this is our organizational statement on body positivity. You can find it on our website. We would love to see other organizations have similar sort of statements and guiding frameworks and things like that. This statement came written by the task force with feedback from the folks that Brooke talked about. So for us, body positivity at FoodShare means that there is no wrong way to have a body and that all bodies have a right to exist as they are, full stop. We have this really awesome art. We thought we'd just let you know that this beautiful artwork is available for purchase as a tote bag from our online store. And Calla will share that link with you. So to carry on with the statement, we acknowledge that many people, particularly those who identify as fat, racialized, trans, queer, gender nonconforming, or disabled, are most often told what they can and cannot do with their bodies and how to feel about their bodies. These messages come from many sources: popular culture, family members, coworkers, teachers, doctors, or even strangers in the grocery store. We call this body policing, and we do not support it. We want to build communities that discourage body shaming and that separate feelings of shame from people's food choices. Body positivity for FoodShare means that everyone determines how they want to feel. I'll have to move the chat box, sorry. Feel about their body, what foods they want to eat, and how they determine their health, physical, emotional, or psychological. This is a big deal for a place like FoodShare that is focused on getting fresh fruits and vegetables out into the world, to be saying that we're not going to be prescriptive about telling people what foods they need to eat. Body positivity means that everyone holds the responsibility to challenge their attitudes and assumptions about other people's bodies, regardless of shape or size. And it means understanding that no one can know another person's health by looking at them. So we wanted to include a piece that says, like, you are obligated as a fellow human to challenge your own assumptions. We're going to highlight this piece here. It means understanding that no one can know another's health by looking at them. We thought that was like a really strong statement. And then maybe a year afterwards, one of our colleagues reached out and said, hey, I found this post on Instagram that essentially was saying, how do we want to frame it? Like, me knowing your health, like, is none of my business and it doesn't matter. And whether you are a healthy fat person or not is none of my business and it doesn't matter. And you are still deserving of equal rights as everybody else. And you are still deserving of access to food and medical care and all services and all spaces without stigma and shame. So one thing we're doing right now as a committee is, even though we thought this was really strong, is to say maybe we need to clarify this a little bit more to get more specific about health. So sharing that with you, that it's still a work in progress, even though it's up on our website. So it continues to say, doing food justice work from a body positive perspective means we want to expand food access options for all people. And it means removing systemic barriers to having greater food options without telling people what they should or should not eat. Body positive food security means greater access to choices without shame. That's like a huge, I've worked at FoodShare for almost 10 years. This is like 180 from some of the stuff that FoodShare was doing. And also I would say that a lot of our partners are doing as well. So we do not support fat phobia in any of its forms, including where it intersects with race, colorism, disability, age, gender, sexual orientation, or class. We want to call out intersex as a really key piece here. And I think this speaks to the idea when I spoke about body positivity really being co-opted by like white straight size folks on Instagram making money off of loving yourself. We wanted to make sure that that is not what we're doing. So we're very specific about calling out intersectionality often. And so we wanted to just take 2 minutes here to make sure people had a really solid understanding of intersectionality and why it's so important, especially in food work and in our program stuff. So intersectionality, sorry if that was loud, I think I touched the microphone. Intersectionality is a term from Kimberly Crenshaw, and it has to do with the complex and cumulative way in which the effects of multiple forms of discrimination, so someone who is experiencing racism and sexism and classism, for example, that those things combine and they overlap and they intersect to create an entirely new standpoint, especially in the experiences of marginalized individuals and groups. So I just gave you a definition. That's probably hard to take in, so we're gonna go through an example. So a really classic case study that Kimberly Crenshaw used as an introduction to the idea of intersectionality is a Black woman applying for a job in a factory in 1970s America. So this is a real discrimination lawsuit that was put forward after the Civil Rights Act. So a Black woman applied for a job. In this situation, she filed a discrimination lawsuit. The factory said that they do not discriminate against workers because if you looked at their workforce, they had both Black people working there and they had women there. So they're not discriminating, they're not racist or sexist. But if you look at the makeup of their staff, they had Black men employed in the factory side and they had white women employed in the reception and office side. They had no Black women on staff. Therefore, the Black woman was too Black for the front office and too female for the factory side. So there's a particular point in society, there's a particular standpoint in which that person, that Black woman is living, that is a completely different intersection. It's not just that things overlap and life is hard, there's a specific standpoint in which that person is living that is completely separate and a different experience from someone who possibly is of the same race but not the same gender, but of the same gender but not the same race. So there's a particular experience that a Black woman has that a white woman will never have and a Black man will never have. And you can use this for class, gender, ability, how all those things intersect. So what that means for us is that if you use a single issue analysis, if we talk only about fat, body size and fatness, if we don't also talk about how it intersects with race and class and gender and ability, what happens is you miss entire ways of knowing the world. And you also miss vital solution making from those standpoints. So one of the central things that FoodShare is moving to understand is that the people who live closest to an issue, the people who live in an issue every day because of their identity and because of how society treats them, they have unique knowledge and expertise to identify what's broken about that issue and to identify how to fix it. So in our work around body positivity and fat shaming and fat activism and fat liberation, we want to ensure that we are centering the expertise of people who are racialized, working class, low income, gender nonconforming, different ability, disabled, those types of things. And that it's really important to keep that intersectional lens when you're doing any type of like program design, policy design, anything like that. So, okay, so one of the key things we want to call out to in our body positivity work is that weight stigma is a race issue. They are not separate issues. So one book I highly recommend that folks read is called Fearing the Black Body by Sabrina Strings. It's a very detailed historical, it's like nonfiction, but it's written in such a way that you can read it fairly easily. But one of the things she does throughout this book is really draw like super concrete connections between the ways that weight and body size is like intimately connected to the idea of racial classification theories. So, oh yeah, I see some people saying great book. It's a really good book, I recommend it. So a pullout quote is anti-fat attitudes originated not with medical findings. They're not coming from medical studies, but from Enlightenment era beliefs that overfeeding and fatness were evidence of savagery and racial inferiority. Let me see if I can go. Okay, so racial classification theories throughout history. So if a lot of those theories come from people, Bernier, Diderot, Buffon, those are people that over centuries are kind of like the people who birthed the idea of classifying people by race. all of those authors associate fatness with blackness, and they associate being thin with whiteness. It's in every single one of their racial classification theories. And when we see gradations within whiteness emerge in the 19th century, those theories also include stature and girth as a way to further separate pure white people from hybrids, as the language that they used. And those are people who are like of size. So one of the things that's really important to remember is that pretty much every white supremacist theory, sorry, I'm like trying to see my screen, but also have my camera here, and I think I'm like moving my camera around. This is great. Lots of Zoom stuff going on. Okay, better. White supremacist theories are closely tied and cannot be separated from the idea of shaming fat bodies and idealizing thinness. It's like they're one and the same. And that's an important thing to remember. So if you haven't gotten this message yet, this is why intersectionality is key to our body positivity work. And if you are doing this kind of work in your own setting, it should be central to yours as well.
Okay,
Back.
let's talk about taking this thing public. Step 1, sort your Wi-Fi out. Step 2. Okay, so at this point, we have feedback from staff. We've consulted with experts in the field. FoodShare's board is on board, and we're finally ready to go public. So the body positivity statement lives on our website alongside our action plan, which we will share.
Sorry, I have
Next
to do
slide. Sorry, yes. Okay, so accountability here is key. So by posting and sharing and talking about our statement and action plan, it holds us accountable to you and to the communities that we work alongside. So here's how we're doing this. So this workshop is part of our action plan, for example. So tick, and will be available to view long after we're done here today. So it'll be on our website for other folks. We're creating a frequently asked question document. It's in the works to preempt some of the questions we think we'll be receiving about our body positivity stance. You can also expect to see the outlines for body positivity workshop series on our educator resources. There is one that lives on there already, and Cal is going to share the educator resources page with you so you can have a look through there. And as you've witnessed, our work is never done, so we will continue to review our statement and practices as often as we need to. So, for example, the task force did take a bit of a hiatus, but then when we realized, you know, we're ready for the next steps, we came back together and picked back up again. So there is a little bit of an ebb and flow, but we're just going to keep chipping away at this. Sorry, yes, next slide, thank you. Okay, so let's talk about an example of putting this into practice. So we call it our traffic light policy for partnerships and funders. So this is green light. FoodShare will share our statement on body positivity with funders and project partners and encourage critical and open conversation about obesity myths and health claims. Engage funders and partners in critical conversations when they use obesity myths and body size references in their own work. We'll encourage the use of more inclusive language or an omission of references to body size when used by funders and partners. Next slide, thank you. So this is orange or amber light. Proceed with caution. When funders or partners do not mention body size or obesity, but do state that their work is about healthy choices or good health. So that's something that, for example, we would look in a bit deeper and investigate a little bit further. When a funder or partner has previously made public statements around obesity or body size that do not align with our statement on body positivity. And this is red light, red flag, alarm bells. We will not participate in projects that measure or track data on body size, even when it is considered optional for participants. Apply for funding that stated intention is to reduce or address or tackle, etc., obesity. Sign off on coalition statements that include negative language around obesity or body size, or that associate body size with health. So just a little note here that it is okay to bite the hand that feeds you, and we do it, and we've done it. But you know what? It opens up a space for really critical conversation, and that's okay. Okay, so Katie's going to talk about another real life example of how we implemented our traffic guide policy to say no thank you.
Yeah, so that sort of like stoplight framework was written by the staff who were on the task force, and then it went to the board. So the board fully bought into, like, which I think is key, because there's definitely times where staff might be saying we're not going to pursue this funding, and a board member might say no, it's important, you need to. So having this happen at the same time as staff, senior leadership, management, and board, like all of those people need to be having a similar conversation at the same time. Because what happened then was a real life case study that we'll share with you, is about the CAN risk tool for diabetes assessment. So we had a long-term community partner reach out and say, hey, we know you have a commercial kitchen space at FoodShare. This is pre-COVID. Could we use your space? You would bring in participants, like you would bring in communities that you work with, and that we would run this workshop. I think previously we would have said, like, yeah, sure, sounds good. We have the space. We've worked with you for a long time. Having been doing this work though, and having this framework in place, we said, before we say anything, can you let us know what your curriculum is? Like, what are you going to be doing in your session? Because maybe there's room for collaboration, or maybe we can give you some feedback or whatever. And we're really happy we asked that question, because what they were going to do, they were asking us to bring in folks from the local community, surrounding neighborhood. Like just the makeup of that community, it would have been largely a group of racialized, lower income people coming into the space. And they would have been coming they would have perceived it as a food share workshop and a food share sort of like offering. So they said, we're going to use as part of the workshop, we're going to use the CAN risk tool. So we said, can you share the CAN risk tool with us? So this is the CAN risk tool. There's like a version you can print out and give to people, and they fill it out. And then there's an online version. So these are from the online version. They said, what we're going to do is bring people together. We're going to talk about the risks of type 2 diabetes and pre-diabetes. We're going to go through this CAN risk tool together. We're going to fill it out together in a group setting. And then they'll come back for week 2 and we'll cook something. So we went through it. So these are screen grabs from the CAN risk tool. So first off, are you male or female? So from the outset, I have issues with how gender is presented and sex is presented in here. There's only 2 options. There's no option in a group setting either to say, I don't want to answer this question and I would like to skip it, to say other, to say gender nonconforming. So that on the first outset is, if we're using an intersectional lens, is not great. It then asks you to measure your height and weight in a group setting and fill out this online form, which I would not enjoy doing. And I'm assuming that many folks in the call would also not enjoy doing that together. So you measure your height and your weight, and it gives you a BMI, and then this is the chart that you get. So one thing we want to highlight is there's one category called normal, and then there's not normal, not normal, not normal, essentially. So my results are either going to be normal or not normal, which doesn't feel good, right? And I also don't really want to do that in a group setting. You then measure your waist circumference in a group setting, which we're not interested in doing. And, as we said in our framework, we're not going to do things that take any sort of like bio data, even if it's optional. We raised this with the facilitators, and they said, we did think that people might be uncomfortable, so we were going to provide the option that they could request to go to a private room and do it themselves, which again feels like requiring people to single out and name that they feel uncomfortable rather than creating a situation where everyone feels comfortable. It does ask, how often do you eat vegetable or fruits? And then tells you that you should be eating fruits and vegetables every day. If we're talking about folks who are living on a low income, perhaps are on a fixed income, precariously employed, don't have access to fruits and vegetables every day, answering this question is like shame and stigma. Like, what is the benefit of filling this out? And then ask for your ethnic group and your biological parents. So I just took the father one, but even these categories, the fact that there's white, some categories, and then one called other non-white, there's literally a category called other, like it's literally othering people in the space. So we said no. Essentially what you end up with when you use this Canvas tool is like a high alert message, or it doesn't say hi, it's in yellow or orange. And it tells you that you should go talk to a medical professional. So as a fat person, if I'm doing this workshop, I'm left at the end of this workshop being told that I'm at a heightened risk, which, to be honest, every single day of my life, I'm informed of the risks, the supposed risks related to the size of my body, right? And I don't hear it from my doctor. I hear it from the news. I get it from Instagram. It's targeted ads on Facebook. It's people, like, it's everywhere. So what new information is being provided? And in the Canvas tool, it says even a small amount of weight loss is beneficial. So it says, even if you don't need to lose weight, any small amount of weight loss is beneficial for you. So the result of this workshop is that I am being told that I should work to make my body smaller. At the end of this workshop, nothing has changed to make it easier or safer for me to access non-stigmatizing medical care. So it ends by saying, go to your doctor, but we know that fat people experience shame and stigma when they go to the doctor. So the end result is I feel worse about my body than when the workshop started. I'm no better off, and it's a net loss for me participating in this workshop. So using our framework, we were able to say, hey, this is our framework for stuff that we do. This is our red light kind of agreement. And so we're not going to participate, and we didn't. From a programs design perspective, I think some really critical questions are, is the activity that you're doing going to increase stigma and shame? If it is, don't do it, even if you think there's some type of trade-off. Is it rooted in real research, or is it only assumptions about program users? I think there's a lot of assumptions that people who are in fat bodies don't know how to cook, or don't know that they're in a fat body, or don't know that there are any type of risk that they might have. And if they only knew, then it would be fine. And that speaks to the third one, which is, does it actually do anything to change the conditions for a person's life? You know, we ask that person, do you eat fruits and vegetables every day? Are we putting our money into getting people through the door to fill out a survey to assess their risk about, do they eat fruits and vegetables every day? Or can we put our money into making it easier for that person to access fruits and vegetables every day? So I would encourage people to answer these questions honestly. And there's a good chance that there's activities that you're doing that you shouldn't do. And even if it's something that you've always done. And I say this as FoodShare, who has been spending the last 3 or so years wrestling with the very fact that there's lots that we do that FoodShare does that we're known for that we're no longer doing because of questions like this and because of the framework that we did. I wanted to also say, I see good stuff going on in the chat. We're going to keep going, but Cal is just going to pull out some questions and stuff, so we will address it, but we'll just address it at the end. So, but please feel free to keep putting stuff in the chat. So, oh, I have to do the slide here. Great. So another kind of real world example Brooke's going to go through for you.
Yeah, so let's talk about how we use our body positivity statement and stance and input it into programming that we already have.
Good. Oh, yeah.
Yes, fine, thank you. So this activity was introduced in a community kitchen setting, and it happened on Black Mental Health Day with a group of youth from the neighbourhood. And for those of you that don't know, the first Monday in March every year is Black Mental Health Day, so mark your calendars. Okay, so this session for Black Mental Health Day had the following goals: to explore the ways in which anti-Black racism is embedded within our food system and broader structures, to share the ways in which it is felt and experienced, to reflect on how we can take care of ourselves and of each other. So this is an example of a workshop that had an anti-Black racism focus, but with a body positivity lens. Okay, so let's talk about this Icebreaker activity that was developed and implemented by my colleague Jade from Community Food Programs. So the activity goals to challenge the mainstream attitudes and assumptions associated with food, to rewrite the messages we associate with food, confronting negative values and judgments such as shame associated with unhealthy eating. Okay, so what do you need for this activity? You need a bunch of sticky notes, you need some pens, and you need some pictures of food. And so you should use pictures, if you're going to do this, that are culturally reflective and accessible to the group that you're working with. I chose these pictures for this presentation because they're foods that I like. So we're going to take this hot dog and we're going to use it for this example. Okay, so what do? We get stickies and we pre-write a bunch of judgments on the stickies. So here are some of the usual suspects. So healthy, unhealthy, good, bad. We also include, you can go to the next one, Katie, some blank stickies as well, so that the folks who are participating in the workshop can actually add their own statements, quotes, judgments, whatever they feel is appropriate, without really knowing what the activity is yet at this point. Okay. Okay, so then they're asked to label these foods. So for example, I might take the sticky bad and put it onto the hot dog, because from a variety of different sources, I might have received the message that hot dogs are bad. Okay, so then the next activity is for the group to cover up these judgment sticky notes with new ones that are filled with stories or memories or other associations with the food items. So you could ask them things like, how does this food bring you comfort? How does it connect you with your family or your peers? Does it play a role in any special celebrations or ceremonies? Or is it more about survival, for example? So we're really changing the narrative here. So for example, I might say, you know what, going to the baseball with my friends. When I think of hot dogs, I think of going to the baseball with my friends. So I cover that bad judgment right up. Okay, so some activity discussion points could be, why do you think we're doing this activity? Where do all these messages about food actually come from? So the values and assumptions and judgments, where are they coming from? So we talked a little bit about it as well when we talked about body positivity and the messaging around that. It could be from your doctor, it could be from your family, it could be from your teachers, it could be from the TV or other media sources or strangers in the supermarket. So we're getting messages about food from many different places all the time. So what's the point of replacing these judgments with our own stories and feelings? When we talk about anti-Black racism, do you see anti-Black racism embedded within any of these judgments or assumptions attached to these foods?
Sorry. Oh my gosh.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No,
I forgot that I have the slide. I'm sorry.
Yeah, just keep going one forward.
Sorry.
Yeah, yep. How does the food system frame Black people's bodies and Black foods? About body positivity. What does health mean to you, and who defines what healthy is? What is body policing, and how could you discourage body policing in your own life? So these are the types of discussions that happened within this community kitchen setting. Thanks.
Cool. So sorry about moving the slides. I was trying to check the conversation in the chat and then I forgot.
Hey, no problem. I can talk about this stuff.
This, Brooke had it. Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is another example of FoodShare turning inwardly and adapting some of our HR practices or adding some new things in as a result of the body positivity statement and task force. So new employees receive our statement now and they review it during their orientation period. All staff trainings, so something like this one. And also we're having a bystander intervention training early in 2021, which will practice intervening in conversations at work that include body policing and fat shaming. So some education around what to do if you see it, both in the workplace, but also just in your life. I'm just going to move that comment out of the way. We're working on putting up some body positivity supporting artwork around the office. So that artwork that was done for us for our tote bags that you're all going to buy after this session. No, you don't have to, but they're very cute. We're going to put that artwork up, I think, around the office and some other stuff that we like as well. Okay, sorry, I'm just moving those comments out of the way. All staff were invited to attend a recent panel discussion, Dismantling Fat Shaming and Weight Stigma, which happened in September of this year. It was excellent. It's on YouTube. Kala is going to share the link with you. I highly, highly recommend that you check that one out. It was brilliant. Okay.
And we've got some links here, but we also have some links in like a document that we'll share of just like some good introduction level stuff that also we feel has that intersectional lens that's pretty key, and some options for things that you could listen to or watch like in video format. So they live here, but we're also going to put it in the chat. But we do have some time. It's 12. So if you need to go, you can go, but absolutely. But we can stay and maybe address some of the questions that came up through the chat if folks have questions. Cool. One thing I wanted that I saw come through was this idea of like, how do we talk about healthy eating without talking about weight? And I think one thing I want to highlight from personal experience, and I also saw someone mention this in the chat, is as a fat person, like living in the world, my weight is always like available for conversation. And whether it's called for or not, it's like acknowledged. I don't know how to say that, but like, even if someone came into a space and was talking about healthy eating and never once talked about weight, there would be an assumption that like the size of my body was available for discussion, even if it wasn't part of the curriculum. And I would offer that like, I'm always hyper aware of like eating in group settings or ordering food in group settings, because questions are like, for fat people, there's a like, why aren't you eating a salad? Why are you eating more bread? Like, and it comes from being a kid and having people say like, you've had enough, you don't need to eat more. Both in terms of like a caring adult way where they had good intentions, but also just society. So I would say when we talk about healthy eating, even if we think we're not talking about body size, the conversations around healthy eating are brought up more often around and directed at fat people and concerns for health and concerns for what you eat, rather than folks who are thin when you have no idea what they eat. So I don't know if I'm communicating that clearly, but I think I would flag that it's often there and like available for conversation, whether as like from a programming perspective, you put it into your workshop or not. So I will share, like I one time went to the doctor with foot pain and I was diagnosed with obesity. And I said, okay, that was my like, go home and lose some weight and your foot pain will go away. And this is the time when I was working at an urban farm and I was doing all kinds of like active stuff. And I was like, I don't think that's really the problem, but you're the doctor. And then 2 weeks later, I was like, my foot still hurts. I'm going to go to a different doctor. And that doctor diagnosed me with a broken foot. So the first doctor was like the second doctor was like, your foot hurts because your bone is broken. But the first doctor basically did like a scan and was like, your issue is body size. And they never did an x-ray. And the second doctor was like, the first thing that should have happened is that you had an x-ray. And that's like one of very many things. So I think when people come into a room in a fat body, that body is there and is available for conversation, whether you've kind of built it into your curriculum, workshop outline or not. It's going to be there in that space. So, let's see. Are you able to share more about how you engaged or are continuing to engage folks with lived experience to guide this work? Yep. So some of the stuff we're doing, one is we make sure that our task force has people with lived experience in the group. So that's one way that we do it. So like as the staff is coming up with stuff, it's a group that includes racialized folks and fat folks and racialized fat folks. And then also, like, for example, right now we're talking about trying to figure out what language we're going to use. Is it body positivity? Is that we have reached out to some specifically queer BIPOC fat folks who were paying to do some consultation around whether they think the language that we're using is the right fit or not. So that's one way that we're doing that work. Brooke, do you see other questions in the chat maybe that we should?
I'm so sorry. I can't actually see the chat right now.
Oh, that's fine.
But if you want to read one out to me, I'm happy to.
Or yeah, I just want to make sure we don't miss anything. Do you have a facilitator you recommend? Oh, yes. I can look up the name of the bystander intervention training. So I can share that for sure. Sarah, Kim, I see you. I will send it to you. We haven't done it yet, so I think it's good, but hopefully it's great. Okay. Do you think having those opening statements of intent versus impact as you did for this presentation would reduce the risk of weight stigma associated with discussing food? Yeah, I think it definitely helps. And what it does is it gives you some recourse and a measure of having some accountability. So it most likely will come up in any conversation around stigma and shame and oppression. There's gonna be messy conversations where people are kind of like sorting out their thoughts because we've all kind of been trained to think a certain way. So they're going to come up. I think that's part of the way that you might hear people describe something as safe space and a movement more to describe something as a safer space, to acknowledge that there's no such thing as a fully safe space. You could do that agreement at the start of a session and someone could just blow right through it and say something harmful. But what it does is at least set a container and set some expectations, and it gives you something to refer back to if you do need to address a comment. So they're helpful, but we always try to be clear that like we can't guarantee that something, you know, fat phobic or racist or something is not going to come up in a space. But it also is very important if you're a facilitator doing this type of work. Do you personally feel comfortable talking about fat phobia? Do you personally feel comfortable talking about racism and sexism? Can you answer the question like, how is fat phobia connected to food justice? If you don't feel comfortable, then that's probably some work that you want to do around how would you answer a question like that if a youth was asking you that question or a program participant. Yeah. Let's see. Oh, okay. Feeling overwhelmed by doing this work within a primary care setting. Oh, as an RD, any suggestions? Brooke, with a dietitian background. Do you have any insight?
Well, I will say that the feeling, I would say embrace that feeling of being overwhelmed, because that means you're on the right track and you're starting your journey. I remember back in the days when I was doing RD work in a primary care setting, we would have lunch and learns with each other. I would recommend starting to open up the conversation with your colleagues if you're working in a team environment, or find a team of dietitians who are doing similar work to you so that you can start having this conversation. I know there's a lot of dietitians involved in the health at every size movement specifically, so that might be a good place to start looking for resources that you can use. But I feel like it's something that needs to have your whole department on board. But I do think that feeling overwhelmed is good in a strange way. I do think that that is important. And as a dietitian, or from a background of a dietitian, I felt very uncomfortable. I felt really, I really struggled with a lot of the concepts and had, like Katie said very kindly, messy conversations. She's probably talking about me. Because I like to think through things and process things verbally. And there was a lot of that. And it takes time too. So be kind to yourself as well.
Yeah. Yeah, a similar question. There was a similar question about, was there any pushback? Oh yeah, we had pushback from everyone all the time. And it's interesting because you sometimes get pushback from people who are totally sold. They totally want to do it, but they're just like, we've all been living in this society for so long where these messages are so ingrained. So it's an interesting space where sometimes like it wasn't pushback from people who were like, I don't agree, this isn't important. It's people saying, this is totally important, but also like, what do you mean we would start to do it this way? Because that's so different from how everyone else is doing it. I think one of the things that I really appreciate about Paul, who's our executive director, is like this sense of like, if people have a difficult time, you just bring them along. So like we are open to and encourage and enjoy having like complex conversations. That's not something that you need to shy away from. I'm really like, I'm really into like kind, frank conversations. Like it's nice to give people direct feedback in a way that's kind and not mean, but like that helps move everybody along. And for myself, I think like when people tell you that you've like messed up or you've done something offensive, like the initial response should be like, thank you, because you're making it better. So when staff and when program users and when people have shared like critical feedback that like, hey, you're doing this body positivity work, but you've completely maybe missed the mark on this other piece, like to not be defensive about it, but to say like, thank you for this. Like, this is like generous of you to help us get better at this work. So I think that kind of helps. The other piece is like, some people, as an organization moves and changes and shifts, some people will no longer be bought in, and that's okay. And someone on a board, for example, might say this is no longer the work that I thought we were doing, and that's fine. Like that's okay. So it's a balance of, you want to bring people along, provide many opportunities for learning and engagement. This type of training that we did now, like we did that myths and facts thing and the statement piece with our whole staff like 2 years ago. So like it's been a slow kind of build of like, how do you introduce something, work on it, critique it, keep going. And then the other piece is like, don't forget about your board. Don't forget about your management. Don't forget about like any key groups. If it's happening only at the staff level, or if it's happening only at the board level, if it's not across the organization, and those things are going to look differently, like how they're engaged and what part of the work they're working on. But if it's not happening across the board, we most likely would have ended up with a statement that the board thought was too radical, or a guideline for saying no to things that they thought was inappropriate. So it helped to like have that happen at the same time. Has FoodShare any dialogue with Obesity Canada? Not formally. They've reached out to us a couple times, but yeah. I mean, the other thing that FoodShare's always said is like, we'll talk to anybody. So we are pretty key about like, we recently updated our values and our theory of change. And at one point it said we work with people that we align with. And we've intentionally changed that to say that we're actually happy to build bridges and talk to people. And so we're happy to build bridges and talk to people. Yeah. And part of the framework too is saying like, this is what we're going to do. And one of the key pieces in it is we're going to share it with everybody that we can. And if people come back with pushback, that's okay.
Katie, can I just jump in? Sorry, I've had more time to think about the previous question. So I'm going to jump back. And this is for the dietitians in the room, but I think anyone who's in any kind of like therapeutic role or caregiving role, I think if we're thinking about patient or client or people-centered dietetics or people-centered therapy, it should inherently encompass these body positivity principles. But of course, like with anything, we bring our own assumptions into the room with us. And that might be what we see or what we hear, or what we think we know, what we've read in the chart, the patient's chart. So there's a variety of different places where assumptions are built. But I think if we can leave our assumptions or check our assumptions at the door and follow inherently what is a client-centered dietetic practice, it's not actually a huge shift, because you're seeing a person in front of you and you build the rapport and you build the relationship and you learn about them from them, because they are the experts on themselves, of course. So if you think about it that way, for the dietitian who said they were feeling really overwhelmed, I think that I think you're halfway there. I don't think it's like a huge mountain. You're going to be okay. Sorry about that.
Oh, okay. So Katrina asked about the moment. So at the beginning of the presentation, we just spoke about being in a room as part of the Healthy Kids Community Challenge, and realizing that like this entire provincial project was focused on childhood obesity. So if you missed that part, this is a nice reminder that the session has been recorded. We're going to take the recording and make it available on our website. There's a page, if you go to our website, there's a page called Body Positivity. It has our statement, it has our action plan, and when we update our FAQ, it's going to go there. And so we'll put the recording there, and then we'll follow up with an email to everyone who is registered so that they also get the link as well. But you're welcome to share that link with people. We also we love having conversations about this. We love telling people about what was hard and what's working and what's still not working. So if this is the type of thing that your organization is interested in talking more about, like, please send us an email. Even if it's just to tell us what you're up to and you don't actually need any support. It's just nice to know what people are doing. And you're probably doing some things that we could learn from as well. So we would love to do that. One question is, do you have a list of program partners or orgs that share FoodShare's values and do food justice work? Not formal, not like we don't have like a list, I don't think. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. If you're looking for recommendations for partners or projects or things like that, you can always reach out. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Send me an email about what you're looking for, because it depends on what area of work and what area of the world and stuff like that. But we could definitely let you know who's doing stuff that's kind of similar or stuff that we really admire and look towards. So I think those are all our questions. It's 12:15. Thank you for staying. Apologies that the Zoom was wacky. That's just the way life is these days.
So sorry, everyone.
That's fine. We really appreciate you joining us, and it was nice to share this with people out in the world. And we mean it when we say that you can definitely send us an email. We love to talk about this stuff. So Brooke's also going to send out a survey. It would be great if you could fill it out, especially if you could leave some comments about like what parts were useful for you, what are you taking away from it. That really helps us, because we're also trying to think about what do we do next with all of this stuff. So really appreciate it. Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you.